Welcome to the Word Potions podcast. I'm Christopher King, and this is Strangers at Bars Sometimes Bite, Part 7. Everyone was dead. The first little village I'd passed through on my initial trip down from the surface had turned out to be the one named Silzud. It was absolutely ransacked. Clumps of 3 to 5 boggles sat together around small fires dotted around the cavern. There wasn't too much burnable material, but the boggles used anything they could find to burn. Clothes, animals, or even people. They roasted some sort of meat over the fire, chattering excitedly. I groaned inward as I realized one of the chunks of meat being roasted had fingers. Ugh, that's gross. I can't believe they actually eat that. We lay on our stomachs on a small overlook of the cavern village, watching the boggles move about. After a few minutes, we snuck back a mile or so. The captain with a few guards were talking with Avalro. He turned to us. "It's a simple mission, trainees. Kill all the boggles infesting this village." I noticed Eladra standing with the captain, and I had the urge to walk over and say hello. I'd missed her familiar face and calm attitude. I smiled at her. She nodded back all business. I was slightly disappointed, but I understood. Maybe after this was over, I could go catch up with her. Focus, Hampton. No time for distractions. I huddled with the other trainees as they discussed options. Most were in favor of jumping the overlook and charging the boggles. I, Revan, and 2 other trainees disagreed. "Fine," said Heffa. "I'll lead the charge and you hang back like weak cowards." Revan glared at him. "We should at least get an accurate count of how many there are. We don't know if there are any in the homes or if there are prisoners. We only have one job. Kill boggles. And I am excited to punish these poor fools that have dared to kill Elvar," said Heffa. Revan looked at me and shrugged. "He's right. We need to avenge our fallen kin." I sighed, glancing at Revan. "Alright, let's go." Avalro hung back without saying anything. He just watched us and made little notes in a small book he carried. I unsheathed my blade and felt the thrum of excited, nervous energy hit me. I remembered the ugly little creature that had gnashed large black teeth at me. I shivered. These creatures were revolting, and I relished the idea of exterminating them. I paused. Is this really how I feel about them? How much of my thoughts are actually me, and how much of them are my Elvar side? I was troubled, but I pushed those thoughts aside as I readied for battle. I tested the edge of the blade with my thumb. Still just as sharp as yesterday. I sheathed my blade and patted down the gray trainee's robe on my body, then glanced down at the pair of fuzzy ranger boots on my feet. They made it easy to move in almost near silence. I adjusted the bracers on my forearm, making sure they were tight. The bracers had metal inserts that could deflect a blow if need be, the closest thing these Elvar came to shields. Other than that, we didn't have much armor. Either they didn't believe in protection, or this was another way to weed out the weak. Heffa led us back up the trail. We came across a few straggling boggle, and Heffa cut them down with savage efficiency. I later learned that his mother had lived and worked in this village. As we rounded the last bend in the tunnel, we discovered a pile of grisly bones. They'd been people once, possibly the first ones to have been taken and eaten by the boggle. We skirted around the bones, careful not to disturb them out of respect for the fallen. As we came inside of the cavern opening, Heffa began to jog, then sprint. The low light of the electric lanterns high up on the cavern walls bathed the area in a low orange light. The boggles didn't notice us until it was too late. I followed Revan to a group of 3 boggle and watched as he cut one down with ease. My blade had scarcely left its scabbard before 2 of the creatures charged me from a different group. I parried the blow from one and instinctively slashed down into the other. My blade slid through its skull as if there was almost no resistance. Dark black blood immediately exploded from the wound. I was taken aback. In our training, the blunted blades had only ever left bruises. I had acted on instinct, not really thinking about the consequences. I stood there for a moment, staring at the creature that lay on the ground, skull split wide, blood creeping ever closer to my feet. Revan called out my name, and I looked up in time to see the first boggle swinging at me with its own sword. I ducked under the blow, twisted, and doing what I was trained to do, slashed upward. The boggle gave a cry of surprise as I cut from its armpit into its chest. It crumpled to the ground and lay there twitching. More boggles streamed out of the Elvar homes. There were crude scrap armor, which clanked and jangled as they ran. I wasn't exactly sure how many there were, but it seemed like a lot. I wiped my hand on my robe, then assumed the Makari stance, feet wide, blade clutched in both fists, pointing at the enemy. They charged, and for a few minutes, all I knew was evading blows, retaliating, and the rush of battle. The longer I fought, the more I began to lose myself in the fray. Something hit me from behind, and I felt a burning sensation across my back. My vision became tinged with red, and I whirled around, blocked another strike, and decapitated a boggle with a flick of my wrist. I stalked from one boggle to the next, dealing death like a harbinger. A horn blast sounded from somewhere ahead of us. Boggle with an Algaki horn began scurrying up the opposite path and sprinted up a tunnel, yelling nonsense. He was out of sight before anybody could react. The horn blast must have alerted another nearby group because a few moments later we heard a distant roar shake the cave. "What was that?" I yelled. "Oherga," yelled one of the trainees. We cut down the dozens of boggle and the remaining began to retreat back up the cave. I paused, panting from the short skirmish, my grip already aching from the strain of clutching my blade. Gripping too tight. Relax, Hampton, I thought to myself. Revan walked over to me, cleaning his blade on a scrap of cloth, calling to everyone around us. The boggle had retreated to the lip of the opposite tunnel, yelling taunts and jeers that were hard to understand. I shivered. They were nasty creatures indeed. "Anyone dead or wounded?" he asked. "I feel something across my back, but I can't see," I replied. I turned around and he inspected the wound. "It's okay, just a long scratch." No one else was injured, which was lucky, or just good training by Alvaro. "We have to kill every boggle in this area, or it will just bring more to this village. We can't abandon the village. Alvaro gave us an order, so the question is, do we stand our ground, or get reinforcements?" asked Revan. "What if we set up an ambush? Hide in the buildings, then hit them when they don't expect it?" I asked. Another roar, this one closer. Right underneath the roar, I could hear boggle woots and cheers filtering up the tunnel. "That won't work. An Oherga can smell us out. They're much larger and stronger than boggles." Revan shifted his weight from foot to foot in a nervous show of energy. "I hear they're really hard to kill," added one of the other trainees. I began to feel nervous. What if we send back one of us to gather reinforcements? And in the meantime, the rest of us can stay here and fight, I said, looking at each one of the trainees. Heva scoffed. "I suppose you will be the one to go back?" "No," I replied. "We just need the fastest runner." "That'd be Jenneru," replied Heva. "I want to stand my ground and fight," replied the aforementioned Elvar. "No, you need to run. We'll try and kill it, but if we can't, we'll need help." Revan looked the other Elvar in his large eyes. Jenneru sighed and slowly nodded, grimacing. "Fine, I'll be your messenger." A roar from the opposite side of the cave drew our attention, and a spear thunked past us. Heva pushed Jenneru back toward the path we come, and he took off in a dead sprint. "We need to separate the Oherga from the pack of boggle," called Revan. Heva scowled and leaned to the side as another spear sailed through the air, missing him by a hand's length. "That's easier said than done, fool. That Oherga is massive." More spears and arrows came at us, but we dodged or deflected them with ease. That is to say, I dodged them, and the more skillful Elvar deflected them. I took in the situation and saw what Revan and Heva were talking about. The Oherga was a massive lumbering creature that appeared to be 10 foot tall. Its huge stomach rippled with fat. It was so overweight, its loincloth barely covered itself. A few times, I thought I saw something disgusting flop into sight. Its ugly chin jutted out with a short, blunt teeth coming up above its lower lip, and its beady eyes stared at us with menace. In its left hand, the Oherga clutched the butt of a fallen tree and hefted it with savage strength. One crushing blow from that thing, and it would be game over for any of us. It slowly stalked towards us while the boggle crowded around behind it and slightly to the side. I could see the symbiotic partnership between these two different species. The small boggle hefted projectiles at us, hoping to get some easy kills, while the Oherga protected them from our devastating melee attacks. I knew we couldn't engage the Oherga with the boggles milling about. They were small and uncoordinated. However, that didn't stop their weapons from being sharp enough to cut. As I watched, I realized something. The boggle were literally throwing weapons to us. I grinned and called to the others, "Let's give them their weapons back." I picked up a boggle spear and threw it as hard as I could at the Oherga. It nailed the large creature in the thigh, sinking in a good 12 inches. The Oherga roared and suddenly charged forward, caution thrown to the wind. It covered the space between us in a few seconds. I was taken aback by its speed. It moved much faster than it previously had. "Evlis, damn you, Hampton! That was a terrible idea," Heffa yelled, as he jumped away from what would have been a crushing blow. "At least I did something," I called back. 3 trainees were not so lucky. The side of the huge mace caught one in the chest, sending sharp roots digging through his robe and into his skin. Another one got crushed by the Oherga's huge foot. The third Elvar jumped away from the creature, only to trip over a dead boggle. He landed away from us, and before he could recover, several boggle spears buried themselves into his body. Surprised, I backed up as quickly as I could. I hefted another spear and aimed at its head. I missed and sent the spear flying past its face. The Oherga barely noticed. It was swinging its club at the group of us in fury, and in a few seconds we were backed up against the cavern wall. I saw Revan had managed to dive past the Oherga, narrowly dodging a kick from its huge foot. He ran around the edge of the cavern, dodging spears and arrows until he was behind the main body of Boggle. As he engaged the small creatures, the Oherga heard the screams from his comrades and turned to look. Heffa saw his opening and jumped forward, sinking his blade into the Oherga's huge forearm. The beast howled and dropped the huge club, clutching at the open wound, which began streaming a dark, black fluid. I ran forward and cut at its knee. It tried to kick me, but missed as another Elvar hacked into its side. The creature sported an impressive amount of muscle and fat. Even with the deep cuts we'd inflicted upon the creature, it didn't back off. Instead, it shook off our attacks and quickly scooped up its club again. I had forgotten about the boggle in my excitement, and was surprised when something slammed into my shoulder, pushing me back. Lucky for me, because the Oherga smashed down with its fist, right where I'd been standing a moment before. I would have been dead in an instant. I groaned as I looked down and saw the shaft of a short arrow protruding from my left shoulder. The pain began to set in. I pushed it to the side. Lucky I'm right-handed, I thought. The Oherga moved forward with a limp and swung its club at Heffa on a sideways backhand. Heffa rolled out of the way and jumped in front of me. He slashed the same place I'd cut, opening the wound to the bone. The Oherga howled so loud it hurt my ears. The creature fell to its knee, and another trainee from the side quickly ran forward and sank his blade into its shoulder. The blade must have stuck to the bone, because the trainee was too slow jumping away. The Oherga grabbed the Elvar by his head and crushed it with a mighty squeeze. Blood exploded around the Oherga's fingers, and it threw the body back at us. A few of the trainees used this opportunity to slip around the Oherga and join Revan. The host of the Boggle were almost no match for the few trainees. However, there were so many that eventually, as the Elvar made mistakes, they began to receive wounds, and one by one began to fall. I stood back up to my feet. Thank you, Heffa. Don't ever mention it, Hampton. I don't want to be known as someone that helped him wound Donnie. I wielded my blade with one hand. It was doable, but clumsy. I knew that I was operating at 50% power, if even that. The beast was almost done for. Its breathing was labored, and blood streamed from numerous gashes all over its body. With the combination of us slowly whittling it down, and the other trainees distracting the Boggle, I felt confident that we'd be able to win this battle. I heard an Elvar scream and the roar of something else. Oh no, not another one. I scanned the other side of the cave and saw the brute clutching the torn apart remains of an Elvar. This one had a massive crude blade strapped to its back, which it reached for after discarding the remains of the Elvar. We need to finish this one off right now, I yelled. Be my guest, yelled back Heffa as he dodged away from the Oherga's club. The Oherga trembled for a moment, stiffened, then I saw a blade slide out from inside of its mouth. The Oherga's eyes rolled back and it briefly clawed at its mouth, then it fell limply to the side. Revan pulled his sword out from the back of its head. We got most of the Boggles, but this new Oherga is going to be trouble. I think it's this dead one's mate. Is that bad? I asked. Very, replied one of the other trainees. The second Oherga spotted the dead one, then saw us standing over it. The creature roared in anger and strode forward. I watched in horrific fascination as it pulled the massive blade from its back. It clutched the blade more like a club than a cutting implement. An Elvar charged the second Oherga, intending on sinking his blade into the beast's face. The Oherga swung its blade around incredibly fast. The Elvar tried to jump over the strike. However, he misjudged the speed and height of the blow. I winced as his legs were separated at the thigh, and he tumbled to the ground, staring at his legs in disbelief as they landed a few feet away from him. The Elvar howled and tried to crawl away, but the Oherga stepped forward and stomped on his head. We're down 6, including the messenger. We are all wounded and weak. We need to retreat. What is retreat? Growled Heffa. Sounds like something cowards do. I stared into the mist-colored eyes of the Elvar. It's when you leave a fight to regroup and come back stronger at a different point in time, I replied in disbelief. I know what it is, fool. My family got killed here. If I die slaying these scum, then at least I will join my family in the promised forest of eternity. I'm not really interested in dying right here, I replied to him. Fighting boggles is alright. At least they're easy prey. But an Oherga? I stared, glaring at Heffa. Revan spoke up. Heffa is right, Hampton. We can't run. Avlarok gave us an order. If we run now, none of us will receive the ranger cloak. Wouldn't it be better to live and fight another day than die needlessly? I asked. This must be why you Elvar are losing on your homeworld. Don't know when to run and live for another day. Dredge you, Mundani, retorted Heffa with anger in his eyes. I, for one, don't want to be an outcast, replied Revan. So we fight to the death then, I stated bluntly. Or until we kill them all, shouted Heffa as he turned and charged the Oherga. The other trainees turned and followed his suicidal sprint with a cry. I gritted my teeth as Heffa was the first to die. The Oherga kicked him so hard in the chin, his head spun around and faced me with an audible crack. His body fell to the ground twitching. He stuttered a few words I couldn't make out. 2 other Elvar were hacked apart before the 6 remaining trainees set upon the beast with their blades. I grimaced and began running toward the creature. It stomped on another trainee, then skewered a 4th unfortunate Elvar. I altered my course and instead began checking on any Elvar that had fallen in battle. I won't lie, there weren't many that hadn't been finished off by the boggle. They were like scavengers, killing anybody that couldn't move. Fortunately, the boggle forces had mostly been decimated. The few remaining mostly stuck to the safety of the tunnel they'd arrived through, watching us battle the Oherga and cheering it on. I was about to attack the few remaining boggles when a loud boom rocked around the cave. I looked around and saw the Oherga slump to the floor, minus the top of its head. Gunfire began echoing around us and the few remaining boggles dropped dead. A squad of gate guards sprinted into the cavern and fanned out, guns raised. The captain held a massive 50 caliber rifle, its tip still smoking from the force of the lead being sent downstream. He grinned at me, then handed the rifle to Eladra at his side. Fine morning for killing, don't you think? Yes, it is, Captain, replied Eladra. I felt relief at the reinforcements, but also a dropping sensation in my stomach. If the other trainees would have waited for even just a few more minutes, possibly a few seconds, they would have made it home alive. I scowled at the stupidity of it all. Revan ran over to me. That was glorious. No, that was absolute foolishness, I retorted. We've lost so many Elvar, and if the gate guards hadn't shown up, you'd all be dead. What does that make you then? You hesitated in the charge. No, I collected our wounded and attacked the boggle, and for the record, caution is a good thing, I replied. Some might argue it was cowardice, retorted Revan. His happy smile had been replaced with a scowl at me. Avlarok walked over to us and surveyed the scene. Evlis, damn those scum. They've killed half my trainees. I can't believe they had 2 Oherga here. Who messed up the scouting report? I did, sir, replied a ranger stepping forward. There was no sign of Oherga when I first came here to the village. Your mistake cannot go unpunished, ranger. You understand that, correct? Yes, sir, replied the ranger, stiffening. 2 days, we will hold an investigation. The ranger paled and stepped back, bowing as he did so. "Sweep the caves," called Alvaro at a group of 3 grizzled Elvar. They wore the grey and black cloaks of the rangers and carried swords at their hips. They nodded and jogged up the tunnel the Oherga had stumbled out of. I sank to my knees and let my blade clatter to the floor next to me. I rubbed my eyes with one hand. I felt fluid on my face. Was it tears? Or blood? I didn't look, because I didn't care. I was exhausted. My body ached all over, and the arrow was still in my shoulder. The things I'd just witnessed along with the pain in my wound caused me to tremble. My stomach gurgled, and I abruptly threw up to the side, then threw up again. I heard a familiar female voice above me, saying my name. It was Aladra. She stood over me, concern on her face. I leaned back against the grey stone wall. God, I hate this place. I continued to shake as I remembered the feeling of parting flesh with my blade, the enraged boggle trying to spear me through the gut. Training was so very different than actual battle. I wasn't prepared for the reality that this fight would reveal to me, the ugly side of conflict. I'd killed dozens of boggle, but I'd also watched Elvar die. They threw their lives away with such ease, I didn't understand it. "We need to get that arrow out of you." I nodded, but scarcely had I finished when she gripped the small arrow and yanked it out. I yelled, which fizzled out into a whimper. "Don't be a child, Hampton." "I'm done. I give up. This sucks way too much." I gasped out the words as she held a piece of white cloth to the wound. It streamed fluid and soon turned red with my blood. "I realize our cultures are significantly different. I've even seen your world firsthand, remember? But please, for your own good, stop thinking of yourself as a Mundani. You're more than that. Faster, stronger, tougher. You're better than those meat sacks." There's an old Elvar saying, "The shackled body may be free of mind. The shackled mind may be free of body. The perception of reality can shape your shackles, but don't let your shackles shape your reality." I nodded to her through the pain of my wound. "Thank you, Aladra. I'll have to think that one over. Sometimes it feels like you're one of the few people that actually want me to succeed." "Do you even want yourself to succeed?" she asked with a burning intensity in her gaze. I was surprised by her question. Did I? I wasn't sure. I sat in silence for a few moments contemplating her question. I glanced at her pretty face and saw she was waiting for an answer. "I don't know," I replied, looking away. "Decide soon or you really will fail." She reached down and held a hand out to me. I reached up and grasped her palm, and she helped me to my feet. I scooped up my blade and sheathed it. "You've given me a lot to think about, Aladra." "Good. You can't solely train your body now, can you? We best go find a doctor. I've never been one for medical treatment," said Aladra. "I can tell," I said wryly. "The quick yank technique wasn't very pleasant." "It worked, didn't it? Just be glad it wasn't barbed." I frowned at the thought of barbs. God, it feels like I've been down here for years. It's really hard to tell the passage of time without the sun. "Oh, we count time by the passage of burnt torches. There's a central torch near Gate Square and a few others located around the various floors. It can take up to 12 hours for it to burn out." "Really?" "Of course not. We have watches and calendars here. That was the old way for counting the passage of time. It's very imprecise, however." She laughed at me, and I felt a little better. I allowed myself to chuckle, and with that simple action, felt life return to me. She nodded, and looked away from me at the carnage slowly being cleaned up around the village center. I hate those creatures. They've been a thorn in our side for as long as I can remember. They aren't natives to Earth, or Avalis. No one's sure exactly where they're from, or how they got here. What I do know is if I had the opportunity, the chance to destroy every single one, I would take it. The venom in her voice was scary. I'd never want to be on the receiving end of her fury. We found a doctor walking around, checking on patients. He took a quick look at my wound, smeared thick green paste onto it, and wrapped it tightly in strips of white cloth. Alvaro called for the trainees to assemble. "Thank you, Aladra. It was really good seeing you." She smiled at me, then stiffened as the captain approached. "You're all right, Hampton. Stay strong. I must attend to my duties." She turned away and attended to the captain. I walked over to where Revan was standing with 5 other trainees. "Nice of you to join us, Hampton. Now to the gritty." We lost more trainees than I wanted to. Normally, I'd have whittled you down over a series of months, and only the toughest would have made it to this point. However, things being as they are, you were either the toughest, the luckiest, or the smartest ones to survive, and as such, you will each receive a ranger's cloak. The Elvar next to me began to twitch in excitement. However, since you aren't as far along as you normally would be in your training, you will each be assigned to a veteran ranger. Stick to them like an ultra-high polymer adhesive that is cured over a series of 5 days. Beginning immediately, you will be reassigned to stay in the living quarters of your designated ranger. Here are your assignments. Avlara handed a piece of paper to the group, and they eagerly clutched at the sheet. I waited till the others had read what they wanted. Revan grinned at me. I'm with old Sigalio. That Elvar is badass. I can't wait to begin. I took the paper from the last Elvar and glanced down to where my name was written with another one. Hampton and Avlara. I groaned. If living with Avlara was anything like training, I was in for a hell of a time. Revan whistled. That's unusual. Avlara doesn't usually take an apprentice. In fact, I can't remember the last time he did. I'm going to die, I grimaced. Probably, was Revan's cheerful response. Your death will be slow, brought with physical training, terrible food, and uncomfortable accommodations. I frowned, then sighed. Good luck, Revan. It's been a pleasure knowing you. Likewise, Hampton. I'll see you around, yeah? I nodded, then turned toward Avlara. I thought about Aladra's words. The shackled body may be free of mind. The shackled mind may be free of body. The perception of reality can shape your shackles, but don't let your shackles shape your reality. She was right. I may be part human, but I was now also part Elvar, and I could make the best of this situation. I'd been wallowing in self-pity and fear for too long. I was tired of being a prisoner to my own fear and sorrow. It was time to break out of my own cage and embrace the hand I'd been dealt. I straightened my shoulders and strode forward, placing my hand upon the handle of my blade. It gave me a measure of courage, and I felt a small tingle in my mind. An unfamiliar yet comforting presence. Yes, I would make the best of this situation. Thank you for listening to the Word Potions podcast. Tune back in next week for the next episode. If you like what you heard, consider subscribing, leaving a like, or sending us a message with your thoughts. Have a great day.